I think it's recording.
Yeah, it came up on my end too. Yeah.
Okay, good. So also I just wanted to thank you again for meeting with me in such short notice. I know that I gave you a pretty short timeline and everything, so I just appreciate you making the time for me and everything.
Of course. Well, I appreciate your interest in my work and my ideas. So thank you for coming up after the panel for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So just to start, if you could just tell me a bit, just generally about yourself, what you do, who you are, and everything.
Sure. So my name is Bridget Kimsey. I'm a registered Lenape Indian from it's the Delaware Tribe of Indians out of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I'm also a member of the Cherokee Nation as well. I'm also Irish, so it's been this nice, interesting connection of both the Irish and the Lenape, because they're on either side of the Atlantic. So it's interesting to see different traditions, how they reflect on each other around the Atlantic Ocean. But anywho, what do I do? So I have had three very distinct entrepreneurial careers. I'm currently in my third one as an author, researcher, and consultant. I've been in global Indigenous methods with Western scientific methods for about 30 years. And prior to the career in integrative healthcare, which then led to author and research and consulting, global Indigenous methods with Western scientific methods, I was a performing artist and a model, but realized after I became an adult that just wasn't a good match for me. And I'm very, very thankful because for me, it was an expression of really interesting stories and going into stories and characters and visually creating beautiful art as well. And when the internet hit and social media and all of that, I knew I could see that would have been a very bad fit for me because I actually ended up developing really bad stage fright. So I ended up moving into fields that had me a little more behind the scenes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if that helps.
Oh, that's great.
Okay.
So what else? So what motivated you to start your entrepreneurial businesses? You can talk about any one of them, just whichever.
Yeah. So I think as a child and an adolescent, I grew up in a very abusive and dysfunctional household, and there was really no way for me to have my own voice or cultivate my own authenticity. It wasn't encouraged, allowed. I felt very foreign, except when I was out in nature or when I was dancing. So, getting that professional education as a dancer in ballet and jazz and modern, and then moving into with the Baltimore School for the Arts into drama and more into voice. I sort of fell into it. Like it was exciting. It was a great way. I'm also autistic. So dance especially was a really nice way to connect with community and people. And it had patterns and ways of moving the body and de-stressing. And it was just really, there were so many things that really worked for me. And I think having the arts or having some type of connection in a way that works for someone, if they're going through such a really hard upbringing, for me, it was a lifeline. And then that sort of fell into being a career because I started doing professional work, whether it was stage or film or commercials or movies or modeling. And what I realized, even though I went to an undergraduate at NYU, New York University, New York City, I saw what was going to be required if I was going to be performing arts, a career into like for the rest of my life. And I was really interested in just like the storytelling, the healing aspect, the creative arts therapy aspect of the healing arts and performing arts. And it just I didn't feel very good about myself as a model. So I really was just, at that point, I'd already gotten involved with the American Indian Community House, New York City branch. And that became the first place in my entire life where I felt pure unconditional regard and care for me, just as Bridget, like no anything else except that, I'm a Delaware tribe Indian and I'm a human being and I have some issues and here's support and help. And what do you want to do with your life? To be fair, the elders there and aunties really began encouraging me to go into the healing arts and sciences, and using some of those physical skills that I had developed, such as in integrative health. And they just wanted me to come work with them and do yoga with them. But no, I really, they helped me out so much, and for everything from job training program to social work to groups, circles, to powwows, to everything. It was a really beautiful way of marrying. This is where it began, of global indigenous methods roots supporting a modern dominant tree, which I also lived in too, the modern dominant culture, both Western and Eastern. So this is really the beginning of it. And I studied, it's better on my website, but I've my elders there first brought me over to studying Kundalini yoga. And then as I was doing that, they also brought me over to the Jorai Fellowship, which is out of Japan. And so the lineages at this time, so this was the early 90s, was a very different landscape for integrative health. There's really no internet, there were no cell phones, this stuff was not there. So when people were brought to or connected to old masters, either coming through New York City, or I was going directly to Australia, or I was going directly to India, I was working with some really old lineages, where like Sri Krishna Makarya, although I didn't work with him directly, his son Deskachar, I did, these people, Sri Krishna Makarya, he was like before British colonial, he was getting trained as a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, Ayurvedic specialist, but it was old school. It was about going towards enlightenment. And with the British occupation and colonization of India, everything about yoga started to die out. And so he was told by his elders and teachers, how do we make this more, how do we keep yoga alive and make it applicable to the modern human? And so he took elements and tools from Indian wrestling and British colonialism, which I may have gotten this backwards, but he took what was happening in the modern framework in India at that time, and he applied what had been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the ancient knowledge of yoga, Ayurvedic, and different ways of what is yoga, right? And so it's very different than what we see now in the modern landscape. But he was the first, from what I understand, that came forward and said, yoga doesn't just have to be about enlightenment. Yoga can meet someone and heal them with what they're working on. So what's interesting to me is that he's one of the great older masters in that field and of indigenous knowledge in India. And he got it. He was able to work and craft before the British colonialism impacted him or his family. So what I thought was interesting is now we have all these different yoga forms, and it's like looking at an elephant, because he was treating different people. And then he had like BKS Iyengar and Pajabli Joy, like these really big figures who have gone on to really revolutionize what yoga is in the modern framework. But they studied under him while he was working on a particular, like someone who had, a prince who has asthma, and boys who are jumping around. How do we get, so it was, I learned a lot from that in the beginning about, okay, how do we have a global indigenous method? And now we're bringing it into the Western modern. How do you keep the integrity of the indigenous root and support the modern dominant frame, which is getting out of control because it's more human-centric versus earth-centric? So most of global indigenous methodologies, or I think all of them, are earth-centric, not cherry-picking, really looking at the laws of science in nature and the laws of our universe, mathematics, physics, different expressions. And that really stuck with me. Sri Krishna Makarya and his son, Deskachar, just were a really big influence from the yoga aspect, and Meishu Sama and Dr. Asui and other Japan has some of the oldest indigenous roots that are still being actively brought into the modern culture. It's really amazing to look at their ceremonies and to look at, from many angles, how Japan operates itself. And then the Australian indigenous way of knowing was very powerful and important to me as well. Just as far as healing, the Australian Aboriginals are probably one of the more pre-colonial Mayans, and the Australian Aboriginals are some of the most advanced technologically I've ever seen in my entire existence. Like, I'm just blown away. But, at the same time, I was still learning a lot about Lenape and Delaware. because of the elders at the American Community House, learning, really influenced by Lakota traditions. So, you know, it's kind of figuring this all out. And, you know, I didn't think I would teach yoga. You know, it was really, I thought it was just about me. And then an opportunity, I already started a walkabout. In Australia terms of walkabout, I had done a very intense week-long ceremony at the American Community House. It was natives, healing natives, going around the country. And I cried, and I don't think I've ever cried so much. And at the end of it, I just was like, I need to find my ancestors. Like, that's all I could keep thinking about. And I began a walkabout. I left New York City. I was already done with my education. And I wasn't sure which field I was going to go into. But I knew that I liked connecting with people. I didn't want to be on a stage. And I really loved all the global indigenous methods that I was studying and being that were just sort of coming sort of naturally, or I was being introduced to. And so when I was invited to start teaching yoga in 1998, I was really scared and confused. I actually did it for a while, and then I took time away from it and just did more of my own work with nature with some of these methods, and began teaching on my own as self-employment, contracted, very part-time. And then after 9/11 happened, because I was really involved with New York City, I was still in Orange County, which is where a lot of police officers and firefighters live. They can live and have their families while still being employed by New York City. And so that community, and having lived next to the Twin Towers it was always there. I was always in my window, or I was going through that subway stop. You know, it was just very part of my life. And so, you know, for me, 9/11 wasn't just something that happened, or it was nebulous, or it was really hard. It would actually happen to me. It happened to the place where I felt the most at home, at American and Community House. And I don't know that any Native people that I know have died, you know, in that, but I do know of other people who died. And it was just, everything in my life changed after that. You know, I'm talking about other things, you know, things that I started talking more about and that are in my books. I have 6 published books at this point, and that is my main form of income, is my books at this point in my life. But, you know, being born multidimensional, which is like akin to someone born two-spirited. They know they're different. There's male and female, or they're trans, you know, like it's something they know very early on. And luckily, being a multidimensional, meaning that I live in the 4th dimension and I interface with the 3rd dimension, but I have a different lens of how I work with material, because I'm seeing it from very different angles. And I find the best way to describe what I'm seeing is through physics, because it just doesn't make sense to most modern people. If I were to talk with a really rooted old, you know, indigenous practicing person, like an Australian Aboriginal pre-colonial, they'd be like, oh yeah, I get you, I feel you, you know. But here it's a harder sell, and I don't really find, I think being multidimensional might be pathologized. And I think if you're trained correctly, you know, the elders really saw this in me at 19, and my training began at 19. It grounded me in a way and helped me to heal old wounds, or be on that path, as well as how do I do this? I can't change that I'm multidimensional. I mean, I see people going on these, like, you know, they want, you know, I'm just like, no, I'd rather not be this way, but this is who I am. And so I find a good fit when I'm interfacing with other neurodivergent people or the LGBTQ community. I feel much more comfortable in those circles because I'm 2-dimensional in that how my life goes. So I just wanted to weave that in, because that is important as a constraint on how I've operated and figured out my business. And, you know, when I fell into teaching and being full-time and self-employed after 9/11, it just sort of, a lot of things changed. I don't know if they changed throughout the US, but at least on the East Coast and around New York, it did. And I suddenly found myself teaching yoga full-time and being a yoga therapist full-time. And what was hard is that there was just such a huge need, and I'm not sure how it all came together, but it did, because I was in the middle of like rural lower state New York. Like, how does this supposed to work? But it did, and it worked really well. But I still was I was working a lot, but I was just barely making ends meet. And I was like, this is not good. I love what I'm doing. but I'm not able to make ends meet. Like, I'm actually having a lot of work come in. I'm working all the time, but I don't have any profit. Like, I don't, like, what's wrong here? And so I kept trying to figure it out. And finally, I just was like, there's something not right. I'm missing a piece here. Something is not right. And so I had always wanted to live in New Mexico for my whole life. Well, since I was like, yeah, pretty much my whole life. And I was still on this walkabout of trying, I was doing a lot of behind the scenes work, fourth dimensionally and third dimensionally, trying to get grounded and figure things out. And it was just a really weird ride at times. And I still couldn't make a profit. So I left New York and went to New Mexico thinking, okay, maybe I'm not in the right place. Okay. So I'm in New Mexico. I spent about 7 months, just living in parks. And actually before van life was a thing, I guess, what I hear about now. And I met a lot of really interesting people, and I love living in a tent, to be honest. I lived in Chaco Canyon for about 3 months. I didn't mean for that to happen. They got stuck. The management service there got stuck because they needed someone to help with the campers, and that person didn't show up. And they said, would you be interested in doing that? And then you can stay here for free and we'll also pay you a bit. And I was like, okay. So, but living in Chaco Canyon for that long of time, isolated, I came out of there really different and wasn't really able to understand what had happened until after that experience. But I, got into Santa Fe. It didn't really click with Santa Fe. It was just really vibrationally very different. I thought it was maybe the altitude or being so close to Los Alamos, but it just was very intense for me because I'm very sensitive energetically. And I just kept losing weight and I couldn't get my spine to calm down, but I did work, and I did still, the yoga therapy, was going very well. And in fact, I got hired to contract with a marketing company to do the same work I was doing with the human animal, to do it with businesses. And that was the first introduction, that how I was bringing the indigenous roots and working with the human health of the animal could be done with the health of a business. And so my boss, at one point, even though I was contracted, who had hired me, so I've done a lot of just self-employment or contracted on different projects where it's still self-employment, but I'm a contracted employee. And she was like, did you have your MBA? Like, how do you know this stuff? And I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, it's pretty self-evident, but I understand, like, it was a whole, at this point, that was 2002. There'd been some time here from 1991 or two to 2000, 10 years of study at that point, and working and seeing hundreds of patients, and just understanding how any living organism on the earth, including a business, I see it as a living organism, is going to have the same needs as a human animal or any species has. And if you miss those metrics, you're going to need to figure out, so it just felt like a big puzzle for me to try to figure out. And again, things were going well. And I just felt really exposed and weird. And at that point, I think I started making a profit, but I was like, this still doesn't make any sense to me what I'm doing. I feel very confused by this. And my experience with entrepreneurship was people who would have their MBA, had all these like big lists, and they were Wall Street people. I don't know. I just had this very strong vision of what entrepreneurship looked like. And I was not it, and I saw a lot of businesses in my life fail. And that did not look like a fun thing to take your work home with you. Like, I was just like, oh, none of that looks good to me. So when I got an offer, New Mexico was just really intense for me vibrationally. I love New Mexico, but it's just so strong and such an open portal to other dimensions that I just felt like I couldn't get a break. So I left. I got one of my old patients from the East was like, from East New York, was like, can you help me with a neck injury I have? And this is in Mallorca, Spain, and we'll sponsor you to come to Mallorca. And I was like, you know what? The war was about to start, and I think this was in Iraq. And I was like, I just need out of this country. Between 9/11, this war about to start, I need quiet. And so I jumped ship again and went to Mallorca, still on my walkabout. And I really got involved in studying European massage and medical massage from an older standpoint, from Greece and from other places, from Europe, from Celtic traditions. The European model of an older way of working with human anatomy in massage and medical massage. Specifically, I'd end up finding I'd have oncology patients on this like weird little island in the middle of the Mediterranean, but here we are. And again, I was just making ends meet. I wasn't making a profit, but I also wasn't working all the time. I was studying and really spending a lot of time with the land and really trying to understand certain things. And I learned a lot, but it felt like ultimately I didn't want to be an expat. And the walkabout, I found my ancestors dimensionally, and we were able to have a long conversation. And I was able to figure out, okay, this is the route that needs to be pulled. This is what I need to change. I need to get really, really grounded and work on some issues that I'm not even sure are a problem before I expand further. So the walkabout went from July like 10th, 1998 to July 20th, 2003. And I knew it was done. And I was like, okay, where do I go? And so it was either Basel, Switzerland, Burlington, Vermont, or Boulder, Colorado. And I choose Burlington, Vermont, because I lived in Vermont, growing up in part on the East Coast and in part with Vermont. And also it was 45 minutes from the Canadian border. So I felt uncomfortable. If I felt uncomfortable, I could go back to Paris. And I was just like, I'll just keep trying to figure this out. But the walkabout was over, and I knew it was time to get grounded and try to figure out what was going on with me? Why am I running around the whole, like, I knew I was doing this walkabout, but like, what was actually going on with me? And once I landed in Burlington with like a bag and some euros, I didn't even have any dollars on me. I was like, oh God, this is like not good. And like, this is like when I realized like I'm $10,000 in debt. Business model is not good. And I am just way out there. And I'm like, this is just not balanced. This does not make any sense. And I realized it became very clear because I was very committed working with the elders and how they had taught me to pray. And really, I'd worked enough with human people to also know how to work with myself and really go, okay, I'm going to have to really go in hard here to figure what's going on and get the right help to me. Because what I've learned all along for a business, for myself, my own business, is that if anything in the physical, emotional, mental, energetic, or financial health is off, it's a huge marker that other ones are off as well. So if the financial health is off, there's a huge, strong marker that my physical and emotional, mental health are not good either. And I may not even be aware of it. But for me, the business, the entrepreneurship is an extension of my energy. It's an extension around me. So it's not something that I can walk away from. I can definitely take breaks and put up boundaries, but I have to know me really well. And it is a constant evolving dance personally and professionally, and learning and growth and meeting myself in ways I don't really want to meet, but like kind of need to if I want to continue, so yeah, it really became very clear. I had post-traumatic stress disorder, like really badly, like since I was a kid. It was complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, how did I miss that? But I guess if you're always in it, you don't see it. And so having that diagnosis, I wanted to keep working. I was told I really needed to go on disability to heal for a few years. And I saw that value in that. And I also learning that I was autistic, and, there's all these areas. And I will say, as soon as I had those diagnoses and began working what I needed to work, all the financial stuff went away. It was all gone. And everything was taken care of. And I was like, wow, that is such a lesson that if your business is struggling, how is your physical health? How is your emotional health? How is your mental health? How's your energetic health? Are you aligned with yourself? And if you're not aligned, what is your protocol in taking care of yourself? So again, we have another instance where, yes, I agree with how a business is run and the profit and loss and the summary statements and all of that. But like securing a piece of an herb out of the Amazon and creating a pharmaceutical medicine from it, there's a lot more that the human body needs than just those chemicals. There's a whole process that goes in if you're trying to heal something. It can definitely help. But for me, if I were to just go study an MBA or whatever, I don't, in medical terms, like pharmaceuticals, we call that bioavailable absorption. It was not absorbing. It was not bioavailable. It was weird. I was not getting it. Was not interested. And while I was working with having a disability, I I was like, I'm never going back into entrepreneur. Like, no, like I will teach 1 or 2 yoga classes, and I will, when I was ready, I was struck with like, I wanted to work at least 10 hours a week doing something. And it was interesting that I found something that helped me work through an area. Like I had been abused a lot by men and still struggle with men quite a bit. And it's very painful. And being in where I was the assistant to a maintenance director for a small organization was actually very healing for me, because he didn't hit on me. He didn't try to have sex with me. I don't mean to be crass, but like, I think women in business, we all have strengths and weaknesses, and it's good to know what maybe you need work on to help, because the lesson you need to learn at one point, especially if you're an independent, you're an entrepreneur and you're in business, is going to find you. I don't know how, I don't know when. I'm very pro in like, a lesson I need to learn does not have to be traumatic to learn. I just don't agree that growth and learning, I mean, if that was the case, no kid would ever learn to walk, right? They wouldn't learn to run or try out things. So lessons, personal, professional, don't have to be traumatic. And I feel like I learned that very hard in 2003. And since 2003, I've taken my time. I've gotten the equity, the support I need. I did not foresee I would ever go back into having another business. I felt it wasn't for me. And, that changed when I became healthy enough in 2007 to be like, I really want to work full time again. I really want to I want to be a full-time employee somewhere. But then trying to work a 9 to 5 with my disability was not going to work. It just wasn't going to work. I mean, I actually have, between being autistic and PTSD, and being in the 3rd and the 4th dimension, it just was really hard. And so I also knew that if I ever had children, I didn't want to put them in daycare all day while I was at work and then had all this response. Like that would be too much for me to deal with. It would really damage me that I could not be with my children when I wanted to be with my children when they were little. So I needed to be able to be earning income that was 65 to 100 an hour. And so I was talking with elders, and the elders from all different nations have always been popping in and out. I'm just like right in the middle. Oh, so I'm just studying with a Cherokee elder on like herbs for like 5 years. Okay. Like I did not see that coming, So it's always been in the background, just kind of pushing the envelope as I work in a modern dominant frame and bringing these skills and translate it into a scientific language that a modern person who isn't Indigenous might understand. And I'm trying to think, what did I do? Yeah, so I had that, and the plan for achieving self-sufficiency out of Voc Rehab, every state has one. I decided to basically putting together this intense business plan that the federal government will back. It's a win-win situation in that they want to try to help me get off disability, and I want to get off disability, and I want to be able to work at a job that will support me. And so what we came up with was being an integrative medical healthcare provider, having these certain credentials, insurance company, all these different things, and then also being paid for getting my master's in science for research and for other development. And so what was a little hard for me to understand is that I had this incredible program for 7 years that I was involved with. I could scale as I needed. I could be this incredible Indigenous worker in an ambulatory hospital setting. And because I was trained in a way that basically like a pre-med student, like I speak that terminology very well. I was like, yeah, but 1 or 2 generations back, they were killing people like me. Like, this is kind of screwing with me. Like, why is the federal government supporting the creation of a, we can call it an integrated healthcare provider, we can call it a multidimensional mediator, we can call it a shaman, we can call it whatever we want to call it, whatever works for people in their tribe and their modern health community. But what I know is that physics and math expressed can be different for every culture. And the Arabic expression that we currently use in our system as a modern time frame is not the only one that exists. And I go back to the cherry picking of like taking that leaf out of the Amazon and then doing all this lab work and then making that into a pill misses a lot of what is needed for the human animal, because we're very young. We're a very young species on the earth, one of the youngest. And our human bodies and bees haven't changed much in 18,000 years. Yes, there have been cultural and environmental shifts that have shifted us a bit, but we really haven't changed much in 18,000 years. And we are putting a huge demand on our bodies and beings by many factors, both third dimensionally and multidimensionally. And we don't have people like me in abundance helping out the village, helping out the community, doing their job, and then supported in a way that's appropriate. So I was kind of put in this weird, awkward position, but I was like, well, at the end of the day, I will be able to make $100 an hour. And I am fully supported on this process by another backing party, our federal government. And while it's a little surprising, it is how it is. And, you know, when the elders had talked about me developing my practice in Boston, and I was kind of like, I don't know about that. I like the country in Vermont. And I was concerned about being in a city after 9/11, to be honest. But I went with it, and it lasted for a few years. Ultimately, I can't live. I'm now able to work in hospitals above the second or third floor, but that's only recently. It's very hard after 9/11 for me to feel safe in any city. Definitely not a financial district. Like in Boston, I've never been to the financial district there. But I loved Boston. It was awesome. It was amazing. I mean, I was killing it as far as business. I mean, it was just, I had a wait list, very long wait list. I had people want to do intern or assist with me. But for me, what was awesome is I was surrounded by everyone who had like double PhDs, books, there's innovators. Like it was just from a medical scientific viewpoint, I was so excited. And they were excited to have me because I was finding holes in their research or working with their patients. So we're doing this, and this, and it is not working. What do you see, Bridget? And I said, well, have you looked at it in this light? And like, oh yeah. But what began to happen was it became very isolated because no one wanted to discuss what I was doing. They were like, Bridget, this person has this issue. Can you please just go do your magic? And I was like, this is based in physics. And this is also, and you're paying me well, I'm not going to get, but it's something felt wrong about it to me. It was just, again, a taking of really old indigenous knowledge. And then when their patient is healed, I'm part of the team. And I'm like, dude, that person would not be walking without me. I'm not saying that all that you did is not important too, but I'm important too to this equation. And this work that is rooted in the collective human history is really important to be in all modern industry. If you want the tree of life to keep growing and expanding, all that, it needs to suck up energy from what? The roots, nutrients from the roots. And if you're ignoring the roots, you're pretending the roots don't exist. You're making fun of them. You're killing them, like in the murder of missing indigenous people's situation. You're doing all this. What is going to happen with the tree of life? Less nutrients, more intellectual, making themselves sicker, and the tree of life will die and fall over, taking the roots with it. So I was just sort of like, I love my work, but this feels wrong. And that's when I began to write my first book, Anchoring, is my memoir about how I got here. And I wanted to start writing about what I was observing with like astrophysics because I got into quantum physics in trying to explain the work I was doing in oncology and working with cancer cells to a modern medical doctor, a modern trained surgeon. And so I could explain it with physics, what I was doing, and then they could go, okay, we need to match this now, this medication, or let's try this. So it became, having that medical language and being able to speak in a physics language became absolutely essential to describe some of the higher end techniques I was using that I believe and know that Australian Aboriginals 20,000 years ago were doing as well. I was now just being tasked with the idea of not only doing that, but also how to explain it. And that led me to just write and keep writing. And then what happened? Oh yeah, Standing Rock. So like, I think I got involved with Standing Rock in, I think it was 2016. because I was at the NIH and I met a group of young people who were also at the NIH. I was there for a cohort that was working on some stuff that it was 9 of us from different tribes working on some stuff. And I met this young, they were doing their internship. Johns Hopkins has a really great medical consortium as well, working with the NIH and getting Native people involved. And so I kept in touch with them. So I started hearing about what was happening at Standing Rock and the pipeline situation prior to it hitting the media. And so then that got me involved working multidimensionally with other healers and medicine people on the situation at Standing Rock. And that sort of opened up a whole nother avenue where, things were shaky in 2016 on multiple fronts. I mean, there was, the election was about to happen, but there was a lot of stuff that started happening in January 2016. And a lot of some people in the Western world, they call them light workers, which I don't like. Because I'm like, I want to hear the physics on that. I want to hear the science on that. Are you observing? I don't want to hear something that's all new agey shit. Like, that is so not me. And I was like, all right, so things were rough, but it was rough for a lot of people in 2016. And I don't want to say, okay, here was an example. My business did not crash and burn. I did not go in the black, but because I had worked on a pediatric brain tumor and I had uncovered something really interesting about it multidimensionally, and I decided to go forward with trying to figure it out, because I was like, if I can buy this little girl any more life, or I didn't know that, I don't think I could really take out the tumor at that point, but if I could buy her more time with her family, I was willing to do it. But at the same time, I kind of, on a multidimensional aspect, that level of power being seen by beings in darkness that doesn't want that here, dark factions. I thought my multidimensional team had me, and they didn't. They were blown away as well. So it was kind of, I lost a lot of work in 2016, but because I was independently trained, I could move into a private studio and just keep working on them and make bank, and was fine. But it was the loss of community at the hospital. It was a loss of community with others. It was a loss of feeling like I knew where I was going with research inside of bringing together global indigenous methods and Western scientific methods. And I was like, oh, I don't see how that's going to happen. Now I'm like going, I don't know what's going to happen there. And so then 2017, it has just been rough. But I will say that what I experienced in 2003 set me up to still be financially stable, still have my clients, to still take contracted work, but it was very emotionally and mentally exhausting and painful for what I had been through and seen and witnessed, and things just kept getting increasingly harder. 2020, so writing became an outlet. I didn't know that it would become my full time, like that would become my income, and this would become a new career path, because I just wanted to stick with human healthcare. And with 2020, and I remember with COVID-19, I remember hearing about in December, and I said, I've been doing more work multidimensionally to help with things on the earth and humans. And I was really not comfortable because I wasn't getting paid. And I'm like, I'm not a saint. I'm like, where's the money to my multidimensional team? I don't give a shit. I'm not a saint. I'm not being supported anywhere. Like a normal tribal person would have been supported by their tribe to do that level of work, but I wasn't. So I was like, you can't ask me multidimensionally to help on this or this or this, and I'm not getting paid. Girl gets paid into 2020, 2019. And so it's been this weird thing of like, the end of the day, you always have to go, whether it's your business, yourself, I don't care what dimension you're working in, stick with yourself. You know your answers. You know what you need. You know what your business needs. You know what feels right to you and what doesn't feel right to you. Even as things were scaling very strongly and fast in 2015, I didn't feel quite comfortable with it. And when everything fell apart in 2016, I was like, well, yeah, I was kind of expecting that. But I was prepared for it. I had money saved. I had lots of plan, all the way to plan Z going, my life has been anything but linear. And what happened then? Oh, it was 2020. So COVID-19 was the first time in interfacing with Dr. Lee and Dr. Lou in December, I wasn't going to help multidimensionally. And it was the first time I said no. I said, I don't care if millions of people are going to die. I'm just not willing to step in because I don't think it's safe for me. I feel like I'm feeding an addiction that larger powers in the fourth and other dimensions, they should have been doing their shit. This is their responsibility. So when I see the problems on Earth and with humans, I'm seeing a much larger problem that's happening multidimensionally of where beings, creator, gods, whatever you want to call them, and there's lots of different factions, are just using fucking Earth as like their Disneyland. And humans are like the kindergartners in a school system getting abused by like the college level professors, like it's just not, it's not equity. It's no equality. It's not balanced. And so it lends me a level of compassion to all humans because we're all getting screwed here. So I'm like, I am not going to do the job that you all should have been doing for decades and hundreds and thousands of years. This is not my responsibility. And so we all know what happened with COVID. I don't know if I had gotten involved with it, how much of a difference it would have made at that point. I just knew like I'm taking a time out on this, and I was prepared for things to get really bad. And for me, it gave me time to reflect on where I wanted to go. And I think what pulled me the most was probably continuing to write, to get my master's in science. I just didn't know which way. And it was elders and really the trees in my work, connecting with trees for a long time. It really was like move into space studies and physics, because so much has been compromised on Earth at this point. You want to get the actual mechanics correct off Earth to then be able to translate correctly how science and the laws of nature work, because there's so much other things happening on Earth right now. There's so many other agendas happening, a lot of things, there are a lot of overlays. And I was like, okay, I can learn about physics and space studies, sure. And so that's been a really interesting journey that I'm on now, as I'm finishing up my master's in space studies, astronomy, and astrophysics. Continuing to write. I'm very thankful I have figured out what needed to occur to help them sell well. And then I bring in the knowledge of like kind of what I was doing in Santa Fe is working with businesses. And I guess we can use the term, which is now common, we're indigenizing this business. We're bringing in new ways of looking. I didn't realize I've been kind of doing this all along since the early 90s, because now these are catchphrases. I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing now. Okay. So it does seem like things are starting to come together in that way. But I find that ACES, like AICH, and the elders there, has really been helping me to develop, and SACNIS as well, has been helping me to develop. I'm more ACES though, to be honest, just no offense. Just that I just feel like family, even though we can have our dysfunction as well. But there's so many loving, wonderful elders, and there's so much good intention. And I really feel like I can come to the table personally and professionally when I'm working inside of a cohort, whether I'm a mentee or a mentor, I'm part of something that is allowing me to develop authentically with my authentic voice, both as a Native person, an Indigenous person, and as a modern Western scientist. And how do they fit? And so where my PhD will go, I'm not sure. I am involved in, with different conferences now and working on different projects. I'm a solar system ambassador for NASA. I'm a post there. That's a volunteer post, but it's selective, and it is a lot of training and involvement. But I get to speak directly with mission directors and ask direct questions that then helps my fourth dimensional work and the structural work I'm doing. So it seems like for me at this point, I'm 50 now, that all this work for since I was 19 is starting to come together and has the grounded matrix structure that I needed and that I talked about with my ancestors in Majorca in 2003. It's taken 20 years, but they were correct. And so I feel like the takeaway for me are a few things, which is that the physical, emotional, mental, energetic, and financial health of who you are and your company is really important, more important at different times than others. And that financial health can mean anything. Financial health can mean just breaking even. Financial health can mean living in the woods off the grid. Financial health can mean you need to have $1 million in the bank to feel safe at all times. Financial health means different things for different folks. And I think that's also important to think about. And that if one has neurodivergency or a disability, that you're most likely going to need equity help. And there is help for that now. I love the Small Business Association, but if you have a disability, you can really take advantage of working with voc rehab or special programs to help you in an equity way learn the business skills you need, but in a way that is more bioavailable. And then the other thing is that there will be a time that your business will either shift, fall, have a really hard year. You'll be learning something new, and to be prepared for that. Whether that's to always have like, just to have some other plans in place when that happens, because you're going to be dealing with the emotional fallout, the mental fallout, the shift in the work. And so really having some good self-care practices in place is important, because one wants to go to that, then sinking into such a deep depression that you can no longer work, or your health goes really down the tubes when it's generated because of the sense of grief and loss. So for me, where I'm at right now has been a very strong community endeavor. And I hope, and that's why I'm here talking with you, and is hoping to give back to those that took time to give to me when I was younger. So that's my story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was great. I think you answered most of the questions.
The questions,
I've been like checking things off my list.
okay, good.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love your whole story and everything.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
It's been
I'm also neurodivergent and like trying to get through, school and everything, trying to like understand myself better and all that. So it's really an inspiration to hear your story about that.
good. And I think that, this was the first time I've actually spoke, when I was asked to speak on the panel, I was like, but I don't have anything to offer. Like, I was like, I don't know, like my story is so different than like people who have like their cafe or their trucking business or their this or that. Like, I'm like, I've had 3 very distinct careers that make no sense to people, where people say that's just not possible. You couldn't have made your full earnings in film and modeling, or you couldn't have made your full income from integrative health and hospitals, or you can't be a published author and make your full income from that. I'm like, well, I guess I just don't fit, like, it's just like, I don't know what to say. So I think for neurodivergent people, when one gets really authentic with oneself and starts making decisions and finds their own playing field. And I say play when I really mean play. Like, I've had harder times and that's like, ooh, what does that mean? Because I love truth. I love reality. I love to be able to check my facts and data. I'm like super equation physics oriented, and not physics from the modern dominant culture so much, but more from the pre-colonial Mayan or Australian Aboriginal physicists. And I think that they can coexist, and I think they need each other, just like the roots in the tree. They really need each other at this point, especially multidimensionally, before we completely lose our place being alive as human beings on this planet. So as a species, it's a really strong issue. But I do think that neurodivergency will create a different framework. And I've really, I never liked LinkedIn. But then when I wanted to learn more about autistic research around the world, because there's not a lot going on for adult women in the United States, I really got excited, because LinkedIn became this way to network and meet really interesting people doing amazing things, whether in Indigenous studies in Brazil or autism research in the UK, or Scotland has some really interesting stuff happening. So when I felt pressure to join LinkedIn from like, well, everyone should join in network, it just felt false and exposure, and like being like, it just felt like we're all going to be superficial and pretend we know what we're doing. It just felt weird. But finding a path to LinkedIn, for example, which is a good tool, that was more about what's interesting to me. I now have like 5,500 connections or followers or whatever. And I don't know what they're called, networking connections. I wasn't expecting that. And people are just like, but it worked for me in the right time with the right. And yes, I have received work from LinkedIn connections. I have done things from that, but it wasn't my intention. So for neurodivergent, we're really good with autism, I can speak with, whatever the neurodivergency is getting into figuring out what works for you. And when we begin to really figure out what works for us, because we're deep, it's not that the modern dominant culture world has like a more superficial feel to it. And I think, thankfully, I'm neurodivergent inside of an Indigenous community, because that has been very much appreciative and very much because I can go so deeply with things, that's been encouraged by old masters to like kind of look at something because I can and how to come out of it safely. This is not something someone can get at a freaking weekend training in like, you know, wherever. And that appropriation is harmful for that person doing the appropriating and then spreading it, because they're most likely attached to nasty little fuckers, multi-dimensional beings. So like, I don't trust it. I've had to repair so much work from these new age shit of, it makes me insane. And I understand why scientists and doctors are frustrated with it too, because they're open to ideas, but they're not open to things that are going to take out the healthcare of their patient, nor open to ideas that will attach them to things that will make them unhealthy. So it's, I don't, the plan for achieving self-sufficiency was the thing that kind of helped me. But I first had to get real honest with myself, take a breath, figure out what I really need, figure out what I have to let go of. Even though I have the capability in some ways to have like a really intense career, I just can't. And I'm more like focused in special interest, but I still have to keep working those health markers, because for me, hey, I could work forever, but that is not good for me. And my healthcare markers are my actual work, because I feel like work comes easier to me than cooking. Work comes easier to me than getting my hair cut. Work comes easier to me than buying clothes. So those are other things I have to develop. And the business side will suffer if I don't take care of myself in an authentic way. So it is for neurodivergent people. How do we unmask? How do we get closer to our true selves? And now people are dealing with all of this technology, computers, constant distractions, 24/7 information dumps. I didn't have that. So even though I got used to the difference between pain and suffering, knowing that suffering is optional and pain is always a given in the human animal health experience, always has been. It's how do we work with pain? How do we work with joy and not just distract from it? Because the distracting from it is going to harm everyone, including oneself. It's an easy out, but like a Twinkie doesn't give the nutritional value of a good butternut squash. And they're both sweet, but one is going to help you and one is probably going to start taking you down.
Yeah.
If that helps.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. Well, I gotta go, but thank you again for your time.
Now you see, well, what I want to say also is that I do help. I have either at UVM or NYU or wherever I meet people, if they feel they need to reach out, I'm not an elder, but I am in that weird time where I'm no longer just an adult. I'm not an adult. I'm like in these knowledge bearer years. So I'm trying to figure out, like, as we talked about ACEs, how am I going to be a good elder? What is that going to look like? So I'm like an elder in training. So this is helpful. And if you need help, or if you know of someone who has questions on anything that I've talked about, I am more than happy to help bring anything that, it is your journey. But if I can impart anything that could be of service or help, I'm here for that. So just always feel free to be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Be well. And I know we're going to end, but do you mind sending me the recording?